Okay, so I decided to do a Dinah 2 lesson for two reasons. One is there were two topics that I forgot to cover last week, and I had gone on for too long and I didn't cover them. And I just want to cover those two topics. Also, the second reason is I've had some discussion with a few folks that listen to the video or on the Zoom, and I'm not quite sure that some of the things I say over and over again are clear in regards to this lesson. So why don't I start there? Also, I was kind of hoping to more have a discussion, but it seems like this format doesn't really tend to lend to discussion. Just maybe you were thinking about things and then meditating. So I don't mind either way, but the lesson really, the importance of the lesson is in the experience of being able to experience that divine feminine and masculine in a whole way within ourselves and with each other, right? So, a question that came, which I thought I had explained in detail, but sometimes you think you're saying something and you're really not. Question was something to the effect of, are you suggesting that there's a female God and a male God? And I want to just say right from the beginning, I am absolutely not suggesting that. What I am suggesting, though, and from being taught it as well as studying it in the Zohar and other places, and just those things, what I am suggesting is that God is both masculine and feminine. And we are all both masculine and feminine. There's a perfect person would be a completely both masculine and feminine person. My personal opinion is that human beings, I've met some that are brilliant and spiritual and amazing, and have had teachers that are brilliant and amazing, but I've never met a perfect person. And but I will say that the Zohar states that after the pinnacle of Jacob's wrestling, he became that perfect person, that fullness of Tiferet, which is the beauty of God in creation. Not saying that Jacob was God. I'm saying that he was enlightened to that. That was the light that shone in him. He gathered both masculine and feminine, above and below, right, left, all of that together in his experience. So that one question is also related to this discussion that's gone on forever in in all the synagogues with rabbis. It's in the Midrash, it's in the Zohar, it's in the Talmud, it's in all of the literature. The the human desire to see God in an anthropomorphic way or in a corporal way. Now, one big voice against that is my mom, that he's often called Rambam, right? He wrote Guide to the Perplexed, which I've recommended many times. It's not an easy read, but it's an amazing read. And he goes into, because it all starts with Genesis, where Elohim says in creating man that we have created man in our image and created woman in our image. So there's a lot there. What's the R, O-U-R, and he goes into that in detail. And what is image? And he goes into the Hebrew, and it's not something that I feel qualified to get that deep into, but you can read it, and I suggest you read it. But basically, his conclusion is it's not the image that we think of. So if you're thinking after my lesson in an anthropomorphic way, you're thinking of a God that, has both a penis and a vagina, right? Or breasts and it's like that. That's not, it's certainly not what I'm trying to teach. What I'm trying to teach is the quality, the flavor, not the form, the energy. So it's a matter of the energy of Ein Sof emanating is both masculine and feminine. And that essence is in all living things, the masculine and the feminine, both. So if we close ourselves off, the point of this whole of us meditating together and learning together is to experience higher states of consciousness. To be able, and what I mean by that is to be able to experience that divine essence in ourselves more and in creation more, right? So the total object of the lesson is to open ourselves up. If we're talking about Dinah, and we've talked about Revka in this way as well, open ourselves up to that divine essence, which is often called the Shekinah, the divine feminine, then we need to desire, we need to first believe it and then desire it, right? So if we can't do that, then there's a border or a rigidity which becomes klipot or a shell that keeps us from experiencing the beauty of that divine light. And that's our purpose, is to experience the beauty of that divine light and the love that comes from it. So it's not a fractionalization, it's a unification. It's not like there's a male God and a female God. And what I said towards the end, which may have been the confusing piece, when I heard Ali sing that song, it just occurred to me on the level of action, on the level of my own actions in prayer and stuff. Well, I believed for a very long time that the essence is both masculine and feminine, that the divine is both masculine and feminine. When you start thinking in terms of the Torah and the history of the Torah and the prophets and the predictions, and we begin to think in terms of heroes and villains and kings and messiahs, and they all show up in a very patriarchal way. And it's undeniable. And even in the Torah, the anthropomorphic visions are are undeniable. So Maimonides explains that by saying that's a matter of need, not a matter of truth. So the truth is the divine essence and emanation and creation is not like some human form sitting on a throne or in a chariot. But man and women need that, some of us, to relate to God at all. And it's more like a stepping stone. He starts off by slamming it and saying, you're really an idol worshiping heretic if you believe in those forms. But then he comes around in the end of the Guide to the Perplexed to saying, It's a matter of need. In the Veda, the Yoga Vasishtha, it's called, the author just says that that is without form, that divine essence that is without form becomes the form that the worshiper needs. So that the beauty of the love that emanates from the divine is such that if you need me to show up as Brad Pitt for you to love me, I'll show up as Brad Pitt. So, I mean, look, there's a lot of arguments about that, and I don't pretend to have the answer, but I know from my experience, if we get stuck on form, it becomes klipot. If we get rigid about form, it becomes klipot. If we get involved in the heroes and villains narrative, it becomes judgment and harsh judgment. And the Zohar says that's klipot. So I think it's best to just follow that sort of basic idea that we empty the cup and then we just wait to receive. So when we empty the cup, we're in that state of union. So that's what Krishna says to Arjuna in the Veda. He says, Yogastha Guru Karmani. First, establish yourself in union. Yoga means union. Then perform action. So before we do anything, we establish ourselves in that transcendent state. That's the idea. So no, I was not suggesting that there's multiple gods and the feminine God should be worshiped and the masculine God should be worshiped. The opposite. I'm saying they're unified. But let's not ignore one side for the other. Let's experience them both. And a critical thing from the lesson was that vulnerability. Remember, we said the circumcision, the central column, the circumcision of the tongue and the heart, and what the Sefer Yetzirah says, the membrum. We know what that means. So it's all that vulnerability and the theme of hiding the bride that is the Shekinah goes throughout the Torah. It happens with Abraham, it happens with Isaac, and then Jacob winds up putting Dinah in a suitcase rather than just sending her with her brothers across the river. So there's a message there, and the message is we, both men and women, maybe more men than, I'm not a sociologist, I don't, or a psychiatrist or psychologist, I don't know, maybe more, it's more typical with a man than a woman, but we don't like to be vulnerable. And that indwelling, Shekinah is the indwelling, the sister indwelling, is in that central column where we're very, very vulnerable. So coming away from this is that having that experience. In fact, I'm going to add a little intention to our breathing practice when we begin to do our breathing. Allowing ourselves to be vulnerable to ourselves first, even, because some of us put up such a shell to our vulnerability, we don't even let ourselves be vulnerable to ourselves. We just tough it out. We just don't even express it within ourselves. Tehillim, the Psalms, are wonderful about that, I think. Because when I read the Psalms, and mostly David, he struggles in the Psalms for you to see. He's struggling with his own doubts. When he talks about his foes in the Psalms, he's most often talking about his own foes within himself. David, I think, might be the most misunderstood character in the whole Tanakh. People think of David as this ruthless king who'll go out and, with the whole Bathsheba story. Nothing could be further from the truth. He is like Jacob, Teferet, both the masculine and feminine. He loved in a very real way, in a very vulnerable way, God and man. So when I read the Psalms, it helps me open up because I see this king, the king of Israel, opening up in a way and not just protecting the vulnerability. But then, then the second step, of course, is being vulnerable with each other and how we really feel and that connection between each other. So those are the things that I wanted to clarify from, because I had a couple of conversations and I was a little weirded out by the fact that some folks were thinking the opposite of what I was saying. Um, can't talk yet. We'll talk at the end, I hope, a little bit. And the other two things that I wanted to mention, which are related and parts of the lesson that I left out. So going forward in these last couple of lessons and unifying them with the understanding of the Sefer Yetzirah's teaching on creation and formation and action and all that. When we get to the tribes of Israel or the children of Israel, they represent the 12 elemental letters. So you all know this, but I'll repeat it anyway. In the Sefer Yetzirah, the letters are described to us a little differently than we learn in Hebrew school, like Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. These, the order of them are the mother letters, Aleph, Mem, and Shin. And then the father letters, Yud, Vav, and Hey. And then the double letters. And then the elemental letters. The elemental letters are 12, and they represent a lot of things in creation. But the 12 tribes of Israel are sort of like the prototype of all of creation. It's the explanation of it. Could very well be, a metaphor or allegory to what actually all of creation is. It could be that alone, or it could be history, or it could be a combination of the two. But it's important because you might say, where does Dinah fit into that? Why isn't she one of the tribes? Right? So according to the Midrash and the Talmud, what happened was, and this is also an expression of kindness and mercy. And I've said before, and many times, it says in the Psalms and the Proverbs, build your house on mercy and kindness. The universe was created through chesed, through mercy and kindness. So we incline ourselves, regardless of whether we're born of the side of severity or the side of mercy, we incline ourselves towards the side of mercy, and that makes wholeness. And we talked about that in terms of within ourselves and when we're pairing with partners and so on and so forth, the importance of that so that we can cross those borders. So here we are, those 12 tribes. We get Jacob perhaps overshoots his mark a little bit after he has his perfection in Yechadi consciousness, unity consciousness. He he has this union, of course, with Esau, and the perfection comes in that unification of masculine and feminine with the two of them. And Esau cries on his shoulder. Beautiful thing. And then he says the children are weak. Esau says, I'll walk with you. He says, you go ahead, brother. I got a responsibility with the children. The children are weak. I don't think he realized just how weak they were. So he goes to Shechem and he takes on a big task. And it doesn't work out, right? So We talked about that last week. And what happened before that is, so when the tribes were being born, and I talked about this when Jacob was having his children, and I just mentioned that they relate to the 12 elemental letters and the 12 months of the year and all different parts of the body, and they relate to the 12 tribes. When these tribes were being born, it was something that was known to them, would known to the Mishpachah that it would happen. Some say through Shem and Eber or prophecy or the Shekinah itself. And what we talked about, the story, this is really a story of a family, right? And the issue of Leah and Raquel was created some strife in the family there. And we all know the story. When it comes to down to it, Leah had had four boys. Well, let me read you a list that I wrote here. So after they're married and they're starting to have their family and all of the stuff with Laban is over and so on and so forth, Leah has four boys, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And her handmaid on her behalf has Gad and Asher. So far, Raquel is barren. Her handmaid has Dan and Naphtali. So there's eight now of a prophesied 12. And Raquel has no kids of her own yet. Then Leah has Issachar and Zebulun. She's now feeling compassion for her sister. And this is Midrashic tales, and they conflict. So I'm just telling you my experience from them that relates to my own experience in life, spiritual and physical. Leah is now feeling compassion for her sister, even though there was always all of this strife, because it was clear that Jacob seemed to be more in love with Raquel than he was with Leah. Doesn't matter. That chesed in Leah, the above feminine, is stirring within her. She's pregnant again. And she realizes if she has another boy, Raquel's contribution to this mishpacha that has to be balanced for the reasons we've already described, left, right, above, and below. So she's looking at it from compassion to her sister, as well as balance for the mishpacha and ultimately the world. As she's pregnant, she begins praying. Somehow she knows that she has a male child, another male child in her womb. And according to the mystics, the male child is going to be Joseph. This is really going to mess the balance of things up. So she prays that Joseph would become a woman. So Joseph becomes a woman in her womb, right? So when the baby is born, it's not a male, it's a female. And the female is Dinah. So Dinah means judgment. We talked about that a little bit last week. And the reason the baby was named Judgment is because that judgment that she created to even make that prayer was the judgment of the divine feminine. Because it's not it's a judgment that's based on mercy, right? It's a judgment that's based on chesed because she's having mercy on her sister. And it's also a judgment based on the guardrails of the balance of the whole mishpacha. So that prayer is answered. And the baby's name, that's the reason for the baby's name being Dinah. So I was going to say that last week, and I didn't. And the other thing that I was going to say is midrashically, and there's lots of different stories about it as well. When Dinah and the prince of Shechem get together and sleep together, he seduces her, they sleep together, he rapes her. We talked about that last week. She gets pregnant from that relationship. It's not in the Torah, it's in the oral tradition. And she has a daughter. She has a daughter from that relationship called Aseneth. Now, there's lots of different stories about that, but the one theme that seems to be the strongest is that the brothers wanted to kill her, the baby, because she was born of this union with an uncircumcised man, as well as someone who forced her in some way. I don't know whether they had sex before they slept together, when they slept together, or when it was raped together, or when the conception happened. No one knows. The Torah just gives us a very brief outline. But anyway, Asenath is born, and Jacob is very upset with his sons. When he says they were weak, they have a long way to go compared to him. He wasn't just kidding. I mean, there's a lot to learn for the unification of the children of Israel, and it's starting off rough. So what Jacob does to protect Asenath is he puts a medallion on her with the name of God on the medallion. He prays, and the angel Michael brings Asenath to Egypt. And in Egypt, she, by various circumstances, winds up becoming the wife of Joseph. So I'm fast forwarding a little bit in history here, right? Because Joseph isn't even in Egypt yet. I'm just telling you the good that came from the seemingly bad. All right. Like I said, Rabbi Arthur Green says, no drop of love is ever wasted. So if these stories are true, the balance comes back. And I'll explain that when I get further into the 12 tribes and the 12 elemental letters and the unification of the children of Israel in the next couple of lessons. Because there's a few more lessons that they have to learn. Obviously, you might remember them from your reading of the Torah.